I cleaned the homes of the wealthy to pay for my master's degree in history. Little did I know that dusting Jonathan Sterling's mahogany bookshelf would lead me to proof that I'd lived before and that I had loved him. It was a typical Tuesday, or at least it was supposed to be. I arrived at Jonathan's estate at 8 in the morning, just like always. He'd already left for the office. The house was empty, silent, waiting for me. I liked it that way. No boss watching over my shoulder, no pressure. Just me and the relics of a life I could only dream of. Jonathan Sterling was a collector, mainly antiques. His house was practically a private museum, 19th century furniture, oil paintings by forgotten masters, and photographs, and so many old photographs, daguerreotypes in silver frames, faded albums, Victorian calling cards. My favorite part of cleaning that house was being able to touch, even fleetingly, pieces of history I usually only saw in university textbooks. That day I was cleaning his study, dusting the mahogany bookshelf that took up the entire wall, and that's when I saw it. The photograph. An ornate silver frame, late Victorian style, holding a perfectly preserved daguerreotype. A couple. He, a man who looked to be about 35, wearing a dark waistcoat, bow tie, felt hat in his hand. She, a woman in her early 20s, a white dress with elaborate lace, a cameo at her neck, hair styled in curls, both staring into the camera with that seriousness typical of old photos, when smiling was considered improper. Nothing extraordinary. Just another relic from Jonathan's collection. Until I looked closer, and my heart stopped. The man's face. It was Jonathan. Not resembling, not similar. It was him. The same deep-set eyes, the same straight nose, the same jawline. And the woman. The woman was me. Every detail. The curve of the face. The shape of the eyes. The little dimple in my chin that I've always hated. It was me. In a photo from 175 years ago. My hands began to tremble. The photo slipped through my fingers. Almost fell. I managed to catch it at the last second, but my entire body was shaking now. Because this was impossible. Old photographs don't show people from the future. They don't show people who hadn't even been born when they were taken. But there I was. And there was Jonathan. Together. In 1850. I turned the frame over with trembling hands. On the back, written in faded brown ink, in elegant old-fashioned calligraphy, were the words, Jonathan Sterling and Emily Carter, La Luz Photography Studio, New Orleans. 1850. Emily Carter. My name. Jonathan Sterling. His name. Our names. 175 years ago. I sat down in his office chair before my legs gave out. I looked at the photo again, searching for differences, for rational explanations. Maybe they were ancestors. Maybe the resemblance was just a coincidence. Families could have traits that repeated through generations. But this wasn't just resemblance, it was identity. It was as if someone had taken a photo of me and Jonathan, aged it artificially, and put it there. Except that photo was authentic. I studied history. I knew how to recognize a real daguerreotype. I knew the difference between original and fake. And that photo was as real as it was impossible. I grabbed my cell phone, took a picture of the photograph, zoomed in, studied every pixel, and then I remembered something that made my blood run even colder. My grandmother's photo. I put my cell phone away and ran. Literally ran. I left Jonathan's estate, caught the bus, went straight to my tiny studio apartment on the other side of the city. I opened the closet, pulled out the wooden box I had inherited when my grandmother died 3 years ago. Inside, wrapped in silk fabric yellowed with age, was the only item of value my family owned, an old photograph in a silver frame. An inheritance passed down from generation to generation. My grandmother always said it was the most important photo in the family, that it held a secret. That one day I would understand. I unwrapped the frame with hands trembling so much I almost dropped it. I looked at the photo, and my world collapsed. It was the same photo, exactly the same couple, the same pose, the same light, the same expression. Identical in every detail to the photo that was on Jonathan Sterling's bookshelf. As if someone had perfectly duplicated a daguerreotype. But that was impossible. Daguerreotypes were unique. There was no negative. Each photo was an absolute original. They couldn't be copied. And they certainly couldn't be duplicated with total perfection 175 years later. I turned my photo over. On the back, the same handwriting. The same words. Jonathan Sterling and Emily Carter, Laloux's Photography Studio, New Orleans, 1850. And below, in a shakier script, as if written by very old or very emotional hands, was something else. To my love, in your next life. Yours eternally, Emily. 1892. To my love, in your next life. Yours eternally, Emily. 1892. 42 years after the photo was taken. The Emily of 1850 had written that, left the photo as an inheritance for her love in his next life. And now, 133 years later, the photo was in my hands. And an identical photo was in the house of a man named Jonathan Sterling, a man who had the exact face of the Jonathan in the photo. If you've ever felt like the universe was trying to tell you something, that there was a truth so impossible that your mind refused to accept it even with proof in your hands, you understand what I felt in that moment, because there was no rational explanation. There was no coincidence that explained two identical photos from 1850, impossible to duplicate, showing two people who were exactly the same as me and my employer, with our names written on the back. There was only one explanation. An explanation that I, as a history student, as a rational and skeptical person, would never accept under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Reincarnation. We had lived before, and somehow, impossibly and magically, that photo had survived 175 years to find us again. I went back to Jonathan's estate that same afternoon. He hadn't arrived yet. I entered with my employee key, went straight to the study, took his photo from the bookshelf, placed it next to mine, which I had brought with me. I looked at the two, side by side, perfectly, impossibly identical, and that's when I heard his voice behind me. "What are you doing in my study?" I turned around. Jonathan was in the doorway, impeccable suit, confused and slightly irritated expression. It was the first time we'd met in person. Normally I arrived after he left and left before he came back. But today, he had come home early and found me in his study, with his photo, and with a photo, an identical photo that I had brought from home. I found your picture this morning," I stammered, "and I need to show you something." I picked up my photo and extended it to him. Jonathan took a step forward, took the frame, looked, and then his face changed. The irritation morphed into confusion, the confusion into shock, the shock into something I couldn't name. He looked at the photo, looked at me, looked at his photo on the bookshelf, and then, for the first time since I met him, I saw Jonathan Sterling lose his composure. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "It was my grandmother's, a family heirloom, passed down from generation to generation." I paused, looked directly into his eyes. "They're the same photo. Impossible, but they are." Jonathan placed his photo on the table, took his from the bookshelf, placed the two side by side exactly as I had done. He studied every detail. I saw when he realized it. I saw when the impossible reality imposed itself upon logic. I saw when a man who spent his life collecting relics of the past came face to face with a relic that should not exist. He turned both photos over, read the inscriptions, and then read the message on the back of mine. "To my love, in your next life. Yours eternally, Emily. 1892. Jonathan stared at those words for what felt like an eternity. then looked at me and asked the only question that mattered. Do you believe in reincarnation? No, I replied. Or I didn't, until today. He nodded slowly. Neither did I, but how do you explain this? I don't explain it. Neither of us does. Because daguerreotypes cannot be duplicated, because these photos are authentic, because that's us, and because our names are the same as they were 175 years ago. Jonathan sank heavily into the office chair, as if his legs could no longer support him. He looked at the two photos, at me, and said something that changed everything. I need to know if this is real, if I'm not going insane. Would you come with me to a specialist? Someone who can authenticate these photos, confirm that they are originals. I nodded, because I needed to know too. I needed confirmation that I wasn't inventing all of this in my head. I needed an anchor of reality, in the middle of the impossible. I called Dr. Eleanor Vance. She was a professor at Tulane University, a specialist in the authenticity of antique photographs, and my master's thesis advisor. If anyone could confirm or deny all of this, it was her. I explained the situation, or tried to. How do you explain two identical photos from 1850 without sounding completely insane? But Eleanor, always curious and academic, agreed to see us the next day. That night, Jonathan didn't let me leave, not in an inappropriate way, but he said, with a vulnerability I never imagined seeing in such a powerful man, if you leave, I'm going to start doubting that this happened, that you're real, that these photos are real. I need you to stay, at least until tomorrow. Please. So I stayed. We sat in the estate's library, he poured wine, and we started talking, and for the first time, Jonathan Sterling stopped being my distant, billionaire boss and became Jonathan, just a man, confused, scared, and strangely hopeful in the face of the impossible. Have you ever had déjà vu with me? He asked suddenly. That feeling that we've met before. I paused, thought, and then admitted. Whenever I passed you in the halls and before today, I felt something strange, like I should stop, like I should talk to you. But I never did. You're my boss. I'm just the housekeeper. Jonathan shook his head. You were never just the housekeeper. Whenever I saw you, even from a distance, I felt like I was forgetting something important. Like when you know you left something essential at home, but can't remember what. He looked at me. Now I know what it was. It was you. I was forgetting you. And at that moment, sitting in the library of a 21st century estate, with two photos from 1850 on the table between us, something changed. A connection that had always been there, dormant, ignored, finally awakened, and we both felt it. Tomorrow, Jonathan said, we'll discover the truth. And if these photos are really authentic, if all of this is real, then we'll have to decide what to do with this information. What do you want to do? I asked. Jonathan looked at the photos, at the couple from 1850, at us, 175 years in the future, and said, I want to find out why we were separated. I want to find out why the Emily from 1892 wrote that message. And I want to find out if, by this time, we can do things differently, if we can stay together. And for the first time since I saw that photo this morning, I smiled, because Jonathan was right. If this was real, if we really had lived before, then there was a reason, there was a purpose, and maybe, just maybe, the photo wasn't just proof of the past. Maybe it was a promise of the future. Tomorrow we would discover the truth. But that night, sitting in the library, looking at two versions of ourselves separated by almost 2 centuries, we already knew. We knew that some connections transcend time, that some promises cross lifetimes, and that some souls, and no matter how much time passes, always find their way back to each other. Photography captures the soul, and ours had been captured 175 years ago. Now, finally, we had found that image again, and with it, we had found each other. The next morning, we went to Eleanor's lab. It was an old building at Tulane, filled with specialized equipment for analyzing historical documents and photographs. Eleanor was waiting for us. A woman in her late 50s with grey hair pulled back in a bun and glasses hanging on a chain. She was a professional skeptic. Her job was to debunk forgeries. And when she saw the two photos that Jonathan and I placed on her analysis table, her expression was one of pure scientific fascination. "Where did you acquire these pieces?" she asked, already putting on white gloves to handle the frames. "Family heirloom," Jonathan said. "Both of them." Eleanor looked at him, at me, and then at the photos again. "Can you give me a few minutes? I need to run some preliminary tests." We sat in the waiting room while Eleanor worked. Jonathan was tense, I was too, because if those photos were declared fake, everything would fall apart. But if they were authentic, if they were really from 1850, then we'd have to accept the impossible. 2 hours later, Eleanor called us back. She was sitting at the analysis table, the two photos under special lights, printed reports scattered around. Her expression was that of someone who had seen something that contradicted everything she knew about her field of study. "They're authentic," she said bluntly. "Genuine daguerreotypes, produced between 1848 and 1852, based on the analysis of the mercury and the copper plate. The frames are sterling silver, late Victorian style, also authentic, and the ink used in the inscriptions is consistent with ferro-Gallic inks used in the 19th century. Helena paused. "What this means is, these photos are 175 years old, and they are identical. How is that even possible?" Jonathan asked. "Daguerreotypes can't be copied." Helena took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "They can't. That's the problem. Daguerreotypes are unique by nature. There is no negative. The image is created directly on the silver plate to make two identical photos. You'd need to have the same people, in the same pose, in the same lighting, at two different moments. But these photos aren't just similar. They're identical on a molecular level. Every shadow, every detail, every refraction of light is exactly the same." She looked at us, which, by the science I know, is impossible. "Then what are we looking at?" I asked. Helena hesitated. "As a scientist, I should say I don't know. As someone who's spent their life studying the impossible, I'd say we're looking at something that defies explanation." She picked up one of the photos, and there's more. I analyzed the faces, used facial recognition software, compared them to your ID photos that you provided. And, I asked, heart racing. "The people in the 1850 photo are you, not ancestors, not relatives, you. 98.6% match in bone structure, facial proportions, biometric markers, statistically impossible, but real." The silence that followed was absolute. Helena had just scientifically confirmed what our hearts already knew. Those were us in 1850, alive, real, together. And somehow, 175 years later, we had found each other again. "What would you do?" Jonathan asked Helena. "If you had this information, if you knew you had lived before." Helena looked at the photos for a long moment, then said, "I would seek to understand why. Why these photos survived. Why you found each other again. Why the Emily of 1892 left this message." She pointed to the inscription, "To my love in your next life." She knew. She knew you would meet again. And left this as proof, as a guide. Jonathan picked up the two photos. He carefully put them away, and then looked at me. "I need to know more. I need to understand what happened in 1850. Will you come with me?" "Where to?" I asked. "To the place where the photo was taken. Lalou's photography studio, New Orleans. If there are any records left and any clues, and it will be there." I should have said no. I should have gone back to my normal life, to my master's degree, to my job. But how do you go back to normal after discovering you've lived before? After having scientific proof that your soul traversed almost 2 centuries to find someone? So I said, "I'm in." 3 days later, we were in New Orleans. Jonathan paid for everything, flights, hotel. a local historian, to help us with the search. Laloux's photography studio didn't exist anymore, of course, but the building was still there, in the historic French Quarter. Now it was an art gallery, but in the basements, the historian found something: old archives, dusty boxes full of photographic records from 1840 to 1890. We spent hours searching, and then we found it. A ledger from 1850, and on the July page, written in elegant script, client, Jonathan Sterling, photographer's assistant. Companion, Emily Carter, model and fiancée. Type, engagement daguerreotype. Notes, first photo as a couple, wedding planned for August. Jonathan read that 3 times. Then he looked at me. We were engaged and we were going to get married in August of 1850. I completed, voice trembling. The historian kept searching. He found more, much more. Death records. Jonathan Sterling, photographer, died in October of 1850. Yellow fever, at 35 years old. And another record, more painful. Emily Carter, admitted to the charity hospital in November of 1850. Diagnosed with profound melancholia after the death of her fiancé, remained there until 1892, when she died at 63 years old. She spent 42 years institutionalized, Jonathan whispered. 42 years because I died. I couldn't breathe. That woman, that version of me, had gone mad with grief, had spent over 4 decades in an asylum because the person she loved had died before they could get married. And before she died, had left that photo with a message: to my love, in your next life. She never gave up, I said. She waited, and left the photo so we could find each other again. And we found each other, Jonathan replied. 125 years after she died, we found each other. He held my hand. The question is, what do we do now? We went back home 2 days later, but we weren't the same people anymore. How could you be, after finding out that your greatest pain in a past life was losing the person you loved? After knowing she waited 42 years in an asylum, clinging to a photo, with faith that you would meet again. The flight back was silent, not because we had nothing to say, but because there was so much that words seemed insufficient. Jonathan held my hand during the 8-hour flight, and every time I looked at him, I saw not just the man next to me, but layers, lives, versions of him that had existed and died and been reborn. The photographer from 1850 was there, but so were others. The soldier who died in battle, the scribe who died of old age, the monk who died in peace, all there, all him, all waiting, all loving me through centuries. How do you process that? How do you go back to everyday reality after discovering that reality is much bigger than you thought? When we got back to the estate, everything looked different. The furniture was the same, the walls were the same, but my perspective had changed. That place wasn't just the home of the rich boss where I worked to survive anymore. It was the place where 2 impossible photos had been found, where 2 souls separated by 175 years had finally recognized each other. It was sacred. It was destiny manifested in brick and mortar. Jonathan brought me back to the estate, but this time not as a maid, as, I don't know, an equal, a soulmate, the person he had promised to marry in 1850 and never got to. I need to tell you something. Jonathan said that night. We were in the library, the place where it all started. He had poured wine. We had placed the 4 photos on the table, the 2 from 1850, one of him, one of me. Impossible proof of something that logic said was fantasy. When my wife died 5 years ago, he began, I thought I had lost my soulmate. I was empty. I was running on autopilot. I was going through the motions, running my business, collecting my antiques. But I was dead inside. And then you arrived, a housekeeper I barely noticed. But every time you walked by, I felt something, a restlessness, like I was forgetting something crucial. Now I understand. It wasn't that I was forgetting. It was that I was remembering. My soul recognized you. It knew you were the promise. The one who should have been my wife in 1850. The one who never gave up on me. Even when everyone said I was gone forever. Tears streamed down his face. A man who controlled empires, who never showed weakness, was crying in front of me. And I understood, because I felt the same. I married young. I told him. My husband died in a work accident 2 years later. Everyone said I was too young to spend the rest of my life alone, that I should rebuild my life. But I never could, because when I was with him, I always felt like something was missing, like I was with the wrong person at the right time, and I felt guilty about it. I thought I was ungrateful, but now I understand. He was good. He was kind. But he wasn't you. He never could be you, because you are who my soul was searching for. 175 years ago, in 1850, and in every life before and after. Jonathan cupped my face in his hands. And now that we've found each other, what do we do? I answered without hesitation. We finish what we started in 1850. We get married. We have the life that was stolen from us. We create the family we never had a chance to create. And this time, we don't let death, disease, or fate separate us. But what about the social difference? He asked. You're a housekeeper. I'm a billionaire. The world will say. Let the world say what it wants. I interrupted. In 1850, you were a poor photographer, and I was from an aristocratic family, and we still chose to be together. The roles have reversed. The circumstances have changed. But the choice is the same. Love above all else. Connection above logic. Destiny above social conventions. That night, Jonathan asked me to never clean his house as a housekeeper again. He offered me a room, not as an employee, but as, he didn't have a word to define it, because we weren't dating, not yet, but we weren't strangers either. We were something that transcended modern categories. We were souls who had promised to marry in August of 1850, and death had prevented it. But now, 175 years later, nothing would stop us. I need to show you something, he said, leading me upstairs, to a room I had never seen before. It was a locked room, filled with old things, and in the center, on a table, there was a camera, not just any camera, a daguerreotype camera from 1850, complete, functional, perfectly preserved. I inherited this from my great-great-grandfather, Jonathan explained. I always thought the inheritance was strange. Why pass down an old camera through generations? But now I understand. He looked at me. My great-great-grandfather's name was Jonathan Sterling, the same name as me, the same name as the photographer from 1850. You're a descendant of his, I said. And aren't you a descendant of Emily? Jonathan replied. Because your grandmother gave you the photo as an inheritance. But you said your maternal lineage comes from another family. So how do you have the photo? I stopped. I thought. And then I remembered. My adopted grandmother. She never had biological children. She adopted my mother, and my mother had me. So the photo came from where? Jonathan picked up his photo, turned it over, and pointed to something we hadn't noticed before. A small, almost invisible seal in the corner. Property of the Las Mercedes Hospice, 1892. The photo came from the hospice, he said. When Emily died, she left the photo as an inheritance. But to whom? She had no children. She has no family. He looked at me. Unless she left it with instructions that it be passed on, from generation to generation, until it found you, until it found me. I repeated, A photo passed for 133 years through families who didn't even know the meaning, until it reached my hands and led me to you. Jonathan moved closer, held my face, and said, "In 1850, we were going to get married in August. I died in October. We never had the chance. But now we do. Now we are here. And maybe, just maybe. The purpose of all this is to give us the chance we didn't have before. Now, but Jonathan, I started. You're a billionaire. I'm a housekeeper. We live in different worlds. So in 1850, I was a poor photographer, and you were from an aristocratic family," he replied. "And we still chose to be together. The roles have reversed, Emily, but the choice is the same. And at that moment, in a room full of relics from an impossible past, with 2 photos from 1850 proving something that science couldn't explain, I made the same decision I had made 175 years before. I chose love. I chose Jonathan. I chose to believe that some connections are bigger than logic, social class, or time. But there was still a mystery. Why had I gone mad in 1850? Why 42 years in a hospice? And what did the message really mean? The answer came unexpectedly. That night. And we both had the same dream. No, it wasn't a dream. It was a memory. Vivid, clear, impossible to deny. We saw 1850. We saw Jonathan, the photographer, working in his studio. We saw Emily, the bride, waiting for him to come home. And we saw the day everything changed. The day Jonathan got sick. High fever, delirium, and Emily desperate, trying to save him, calling doctors, praying, begging. And we saw the final moment. Jonathan dying, Emily holding his hand, and him saying, with his last breath, "I'll find you again. I promise. No matter how long, I'll find you." And Emily responding, "I'll wait. I'll wait for you. Always." We woke up at the same time, adored Jonathan in his bed, me in the guest room, but we both knew. We had seen the same memory, lived the same past, and understood. Finally, the meaning of the promise. Jonathan hadn't left me. He had promised to return, and Emily hadn't gone mad. She had waited. 42 years in a hospice because the world called madness what was actually unwavering faith. Faith that promises transcend death, that love crosses lives. And now, 175 years later, the promise was being fulfilled. The next morning, Jonathan found me in the kitchen. He had the daguerreotype camera in his hands, and an expression that mixed determination and vulnerability. "I want to take a new photo," he said, "of us, now, 175 years later, in the same pose, with the same camera." "Why?" I asked. "Because I need to know if it's really us. If when you touch these photos, you feel what I feel, if you see what I see. And because," he paused, "because if we take a picture together now, with the camera from 1850, using the same technique, maybe we can prove it definitively. Or maybe we can just have a record that we found each other again. And this time, we wouldn't waste it." We took the camera out to the garden. Jonathan knew the process inside and out. He'd studied old photography for years like a true collector. He prepared the silver plate, applied the iodine, setting everything up with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And then he positioned me, in the same pose as the 1850 photo. And then he positioned himself beside me, exactly as he was in the old picture. He had set up a timer. When it clicked, we had 60 seconds before the photo was taken. 60 seconds standing still, looking at the camera, just like the couple in 1850 had looked, 175 years earlier. And that's when it happened. Jonathan took my hand, the same touch from the old photograph, and as our fingers intertwined, we both felt it. A surge, a connection, and then visions, not a dream, not a vague memory, but clear, vivid, impossible visions. We were seeing 1850, not from the outside, but from within. I was Emily, feeling what she felt, thinking her thoughts. And Jonathan was the photographer, alive, real, tangible. We saw the studio. We felt the nervousness of taking that photo, the first as a couple, the promise that there would be so many more, that they would marry in August, that they would have a life together. And then the vision shifted, fast-forwarded. October. Jonathan sick, high fever, doctors saying there was no hope. Emily desperate, praying, holding his hand, and he, looking at her, already half conscious, already half on the other side, immortal, saying, "I'll find you. I promise." And Emily believing him, keeping the photo safe, keeping the memory alive even when the world called her crazy, even when they locked her away, even when years passed, decades, and everyone said he would never return. She knew. She knew he would come back, that the promise would be kept. And when she was older, about to die, she had left instructions. The photo should be passed on until it found someone who would recognize, someone who would remember. The vision ended. We opened our eyes at the same time. The camera had taken the picture. It was done. But neither of us moved, because we could still feel it. We could still remember it, not as a distant memory, but as a lived experience. Jonathan had tears in his eyes. I was him. In 1850. I felt myself dying. I felt myself leaving you. And I carried that pain through. Through how long? Until I was reborn. Until I found you again. And I was her, I replied, also crying. I waited 42 years, clinging to a photograph, to a promise, because I knew you would return. We embraced. And in that embrace, we weren't just Emily and Jonathan from 2025. We were also them from 1850, finally reunited, finally together. The promise fulfilled. Some people are going to pause here and question if this is real. If reincarnation exists, if memories of past lives are even possible. But what if I said it doesn't matter? What if what matters is the connection, the absolute certainty that certain people are destined to meet, that certain loves transcend rational explanation? We developed the photo. The old process takes days. Jonathan had the right chemicals, the right technique, and when we finally saw the image emerge on the silver plate, we both froze. It was identical, not similar, not alike. Identical to the photos from 1850. The same expression, the same light, the same energy, as if 175 years hadn't passed, as if we were the same people, the same souls. Helena came to see it. She analyzed the new photo, compared it with the old ones, and her conclusion was the same. Scientifically, impossible. Technically, inexplicable. But real. This defies everything I know about photography, she said. There's no way 3 photos, taken 175 years apart, could be identical. Unless, she paused, unless souls are real, and the camera captures not just light, but essence. And your essence is the same, now and in 1850. Jonathan took my hand. So, now what? What do we do with this? We finish what we started, I replied. We get married in August, like we should have in 1850. But Jonathan shook his head. Not in August. Now. I don't want to wait. I waited 175 years, and I'm not waiting even one more day. And so, a week later, we married, small ceremony, just Helena and a few close friends. But on the wall behind the altar, 3 framed photos. 1850, photo of him. 1850, photo of her. And 2025, photo of us. 3 moments in time, same souls, same love. When the judge declared that we were husband and wife, when we kissed, we both felt it again, the vision. But this time, it wasn't 1850. It was beyond. Other lives, other times. We saw fragments. He as a medieval knight, me as a peasant girl. He as an Egyptian scribe, me as a temple dancer. He as a Buddhist monk, me as a pilgrim, life after life, always finding each other, always loving each other, always being separated by circumstances beyond our control. But not this time. This time, we were together. This time, there was no war, no disease, no cruel fate separating us. This time, we had a choice, and we chose to stay. 3 months after the wedding, we found out something that changed everything again. I was pregnant, and when we had the ultrasound, the doctor frowned. "There's something unusual," he said. "Your baby has a mark, a birthmark, already visible, in the shape of an old camera." Jonathan and I stared at the screen, and there it was, a small mark on the baby's shoulder, exactly in the shape of a daguerreotype camera, as if, even in the womb, the child was already carrying the mark of what had brought us together. When the baby was born, a perfectly healthy girl, the mark was there, small but unmistakable. And when I held her for the first time, I had another vision, brief, quick, but clear. I saw the Emily from 1850, pregnant, 2 months along, waiting to tell Jonathan, planning to reveal it after the wedding. But he died before, and she lost the baby weeks later, in the midst of her grief. They never had the chance. Their daughter, never born, until now. 175 years later, we named her Luce, after the studio where it all began, La Luce Photography Studio. The light that captured our souls in 1850, and that now illuminated our complete family. Jonathan spent hours looking at Luce, at her mark, at the 3 photos on the wall. And then he told me something I will never forget. Emily waited 42 years for me, clinging to a photograph, to a promise. And I carried the guilt through lifetimes, the guilt of having died, of having left. But now I understand. It wasn't guilt. It was destiny preparing the way for this moment, for this life, where we can finally have everything that was denied to us before. And he was right, because sometimes the greatest pain of one life transforms into the greatest joy of the next. Sometimes, waiting 175 years is worth it, when what awaits you on the other side is eternal love. Today, our home is filled with photos, the 3 originals, of course, but also new ones. Luce growing up, our wedding, everyday moments that Emily and Jonathan from 1850 never had the chance to experience. And each photo is a stark reminder, the impossible happened. We found each other again. And this time, we're here to stay. But the story doesn't end there, because there's something I discovered, something that needs to be told, something about the photographs, about why they were identical. I went back to Helena's lab a year after the wedding. I asked her to analyze the 3 photographs again, this time not just for authenticity, but for molecular composition, for atomic structure. And what she found was, well, it was impossible. The three photographs were the same age, not on the surface, but at a quantum level. It's as if they had been taken at the same moment, just developed at different times, as if time for those photographs was non-linear, as if past, present, and future coexisted in the same image. I can't explain this, Helena told me, but it's as if the photography captured something beyond the moment. It captured the essence, the connection, and that essence exists outside of time. That's why the photographs are identical, because they capture not when they were taken, but who took them, and you two are the same, now and forever. And it was in that moment that I understood the true power of those photographs. They weren't just records, they were portals, bridges across time, proof that some things are immortal, not in a religious sense, but in a quantum sense, in the sense that certain connections create marks on the universe, marks that can't be erased, that traverse centuries, that wait patiently until they are found again. Emily, from 1850, knew this. That's why she left the photograph. That's why she wrote, "To my love in your next life, yours eternally, Emily, 1892, because she understood that true love does not end with death. It just waits, traverses the veil, and reunites. And now, holding my daughter, looking at my husband, looking at the photographs that prove the impossible, I know that if we die tomorrow, we will find each other again in another life, in another time, because some souls are intertwined in ways that even time cannot undo. Photography, it captures the soul, and ours has been captured forever, in 1850, in 2025, and in all the lives between them and after them, eternal, immortal, unbreakable. But there's one last part of this story that needs to be told. Something that happened when Hope turned 3 years old. Something that proved definitely that all of this was real. Hope was a normal child, playful, curious, happy. But she had one peculiar behavior. From a very young age, she was fascinated by the three photographs on the wall, especially the ones from 1850. She spent hours looking at them, and sometimes she would say strange things, things that a 3-year-old should not know. One day, she looked at the 1850 photograph and said, "That was my dress. Mommy promised she'd give it to me, but she never did." Jonathan and I exchanged glances. "What dress, honey?" Hope pointed to the photograph. "That one. The lady's wedding dress. She promised that when I was born, she would give it to me. But I was never born." She was sad. Very sad. My heart stopped, because Hope was describing exactly what I had seen in the vision. Emily from 1850, pregnant, planning to pass her wedding dress to the daughter she never had. "Hope," Jonathan asked, his voice trembling, "how do you know that?" Hope looked at him with those big, innocent eyes. "I remember, Daddy, from when I was inside Mommy's tummy, but not this Mommy, the other one, the sad Mommy, who lived in the big house with bars. The asylum." She was remembering the asylum from 1850, as if she had been there, as if she had been the baby who was never born. Jonathan looked at me. I looked at him, and we both understood. Hope wasn't just our daughter. She was the daughter we should have had in 1850, reincarnated, finally born, 175 years later. After that day, Hope started sharing more memories, fragmented, like a child's memories are, but consistent. She knew things about 1850 that we had never told her. She knew the name of the photography studio. She knew the color of the dress that Emily wore on the day Jonathan died. She even knew the song that Emily sang to soothe the baby, who was never born. Helena documented everything. She recorded the conversations with Hope. She analyzed the memories, and her conclusion was the same as ours. That child had lived before, or rather, had almost lived. She had been conceived, but never born. And somehow, 175 years later, she had finally had the chance to be born, to the same parents, to the same family, completing the cycle that death had interrupted. Some people call this reincarnation. Others call it ancestral memory. Scientists look for neurological explanations, but for us, the name didn't matter. What mattered was the reality. Our daughter remembered a life she never fully lived, and now, finally, she was living. When Hope turned 5 years old, we did something special. We took her to New Orleans, keys to the building that was once La Luz Photography Studio. The trip was planned as a family vacation, but for Jonathan and me, it was a pilgrimage to return to the place where it all began, where, in 1850, a photographer and his bride had captured their souls in silver, where an impossible promise had been made, and where 175 years later, that promise was finally being fulfilled. The building was different than it had been on our first visit. They had renovated and the art gallery had expanded, but the essence remained. The old brick walls, the tall windows that let in that specific New Orleans light, the same light that had illuminated the 1850 photograph. When we walked in, Hope was quiet, observant, her big eyes scanning every detail of the place, as if she were looking for something familiar in the midst of the unfamiliar. And then, without warning, she let go of my hand and ran. Hope. Wait, I called, but she had already disappeared down a side hallway. Jonathan and I ran after her. The historian who accompanied us, the same one who had helped us years before, did too. We found Hope standing in front of a door, an old scarred wooden door that led to the basement. Her little fingers were touching the wood with a reverence that children don't normally have. It was here, she said, when we arrived. Her voice was different, older, sadder. It was here that Mommy kept the photograph, in this dark place, because she couldn't bear to look at it. During the day, it hurt too much, but at night, she would come down. She would hold the photograph, and she would talk to you, Daddy. She would talk as if you could hear her, and she would promise, Waddy, she would promise that she would wait, that she wouldn't give up, that when you came back, the photograph would be here, waiting. The historian went pale. He had researched the history of Emily Carter extensively. He knew details that we had never shared with Hope, and she was narrating exactly what the asylum records described, a woman going down to a basement every night with a photograph, talking to someone who wasn't there. How do you know this, Lily? He asked, his voice trembling. Lily looked at him with those eyes that seemed to carry centuries. I was there. Inside her tummy, I heard when she talked. I felt when she cried, and when I wasn't born, when she lost me. I stayed, waiting too, waiting that one day, someday, I could be born, for them, for my family. Tears streamed down my face. Jonathan embraced me, and we both understood something we'd never considered. Lily hadn't just reincarnated. She had waited. As an unborn soul, she'd remained linked to Emily for 42 years. And then, if through all the subsequent generations. She'd waited for the right moment, for the moment when Jonathan and Emily would meet again, to finally be born. The historian led us down to the basement. It had been converted into storage for the gallery now. But in the corner, untouched, there was a small alcove, and on the wall of that alcove, faded but still visible, were words etched in Old Spanish, "Para mi amado Jonathan, te espero siempre." To my beloved Jonathan, I wait for you, always, etched on the wall of a basement that Emily had visited every night for 42 years, a declaration of love that had spanned a century and a half, and that now, with Lily with us, finally made complete sense. Lily couldn't have known this. We had never told her. We'd never brought her to New Orleans before, but she knew, because she remembered, not with her mind, but with her soul, with the soul that had waited 175 years to finally live. We took a new photo that day, in the same place where the original photo was taken in 1850. But this time, there were three of us, Jonathan, me, and Lily, the complete family, the family that should have been in 1850, but only managed to be in 2025. And when we developed that photo, something happened that even Helena couldn't explain. In the image, behind us, there was a shadow, faint, almost invisible, but unmistakable, the shadow of a woman, standing, watching. And if you looked closely, very closely, you could see that she was smiling, Emily from 1850, finally at peace, finally knowing that her promise had been kept, that her faith hadn't been in vain, that love, truly, transcends everything, even death. Today, Lily is 10 years old. The memories of 1850 are fading, as childhood memories often do, but she still looks at the photos, still feels the connection. And sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I see her touch the silver frame of the 1850 photo and whisper, "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for not giving up." And I know she's not talking to me. She's talking to Emily from 1850, thanking her for having waited 42 years, for having kept the photo, for having left the message that traveled 133 years to reach my hands, for having had faith that promises survive, that love survives, that families find a way back to each other, no matter how long it takes. This story isn't about proving reincarnation. It's not about science or religion. It's about something deeper. It's about the question we all ask ourselves at some point. What happens to the people we love when they die? Are they gone forever? Or is there something more? And the answer, at least for us, is clear. No, they're not gone forever. True love creates marks, not on the body, which is temporary, but on the soul, which is eternal. And those marks follow us, life after life, until finally, sometime, somewhere, we recognize, we remember, and we come home. For me, home isn't a place. It's Jonathan. It's Lily. It's those three photos that prove the impossible. And home is knowing that when this life ends, it won't be the end. It will only be a pause until we meet again in another life, in another time, with other faces, but the same souls. Because photography captures the soul, and once captured, the soul never forgets, never gives up, never stops searching until it finds its way back to those it loves. 42 years in an asylum seems like an eternity, but if at the end of those 42 years you leave a message that travels 133 years and reunites your family in another life, then it was worth it. Every second of waiting, every moment of pain, because the love that waits 175 years to be reunited isn't ordinary love, it's eternal love. And now, every time I look at Jonathan, I don't just see my husband. I see the photographer from 1850 who promised to find me again. I see the man who crossed lifetimes to fulfill that promise. I see the living proof that some connections are bigger than time, space, or death. And when I look at Lily, I see not only my daughter, I see the child who should have been born in 1850. I see the promise fulfilled. I see the redemption of a tragedy that lasted almost 2 centuries. I see proof that it's never too late. That promises, no matter how old, always find a way to be kept. This story began with a photo, an impossible photo. 2 identical photographs from 1850. That shouldn't exist. And now we have 4. The 2 original, the one we took in 2025, and the New Orleans photo, with Emily's shadow watching. 4 photos, 4 moments in time, but a single soul, a single connection, a single love. If you've made it this far, if this story has touched you in some way, maybe it's because you feel it too. You feel that there's someone in your life, or that there was, or that there will be. That isn't a coincidence. That is more. That is destiny. That is a soulmate. And if you feel that, don't ignore it. Don't dismiss it as fantasy. Because maybe, just maybe, it's real. Maybe it's your own 1850 photo, your own promise waiting to be fulfilled, your own love crossing time to find you. Emily from 1850 could have given up, could have accepted that Jonathan had died and moved on. But she didn't. She waited. She believed. She kept the photo. She left the message. And 175 years later, here we are, together, complete, proving that she was right. So, if you have that inexplicable feeling about someone, if you dream of places you've never visited, if you feel like you know someone you just met, pay attention, because maybe it's your soul remembering. Maybe it's your own version of 1850, trying to tell you I promised. I waited. And now, finally, we've found each other again. Don't let fear or logic stop you. Emily chose faith over reason and gained eternity. Jonathan chose to believe in the impossible and gained a family. Lily, even without knowing it, chose to be born again and gained the life that was denied to her 175 years ago. And now, the choice is yours, to believe that love ends with death, or to believe that love is stronger than death, that some promises survive centuries, that some photographs capture more than just light. They capture souls, and souls always find their way back home. Our home is these photographs, our truth. Is this impossibility that has become real, and our message to you is simple. Don't give up. If you felt an inexplicable connection, and if you have memories of places you've never visited, if you love someone with an intensity that transcends reason, maybe it's because you've loved them before, in another life, in another time, and maybe, just maybe, you also have your photograph, waiting to be found, waiting to prove that eternal love isn't just a metaphor, it's a reality, captured in silver, traversing centuries, fulfilling promises that death thought it had broken. Photography captures the soul, and the soul never forgets, never gives up, never dies. We are proof of that. Emily, Jonathan, and La Luz, separated by 175 years, reunited by 2 identical photographs, completed by a promise that traversed the impossible. And if we could do it, you can too. Your photo is out there. Your promise is waiting. Your soulmate is searching. And when you find each other, when you recognize each other, when you remember, you'll know that this story wasn't just ours. It was yours too from the beginning, forever. Because some things never change. No matter how many lives pass, no matter how long it takes, eternal love is exactly that, eternal, captured forever in photographs from 1850, and in hearts that beat in 2025, and in all the lives in between them, before them and after them, forever, always, forever.